Welcome to the AFCEA Leadership Forum 5-question series. I'm Max Kakis with Signal Magazine. Our guest today is Army Reserve Major General Bert Mizusawa, Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for Reserve Matters. General Mizusawa is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, where he finished first in his class. He holds a JD from Harvard Law School, a master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and a MacArthur PhD fellowship at Harvard's Belfer Center. In his military career, the general has served as a paratrooper, and he commanded the largest forward deployed infantry company in the Korean demilitarized zone. He's also served in a number of joint commands in Afghanistan and Iraq. As a civilian, he's worked as a lawyer, a professional staffer on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and a Deputy Secretary of the Army. General, welcome to AFCEA. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Max.
Now, you've had what most would consider a rather distinguished career in both the military and also in the civilian world. Based on all of that experience and what you know about leaders, what would you say are the characteristics in an individual that marks someone as a potential leader?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not sure if I've had a career per se. I mean, I've had a number of interesting jobs, and we'll leave it at that.
Sure.
I wish this series of jobs I had was part of a grand plan, but I can't say that it is. But I think that one important thing is that you always prepare yourself for opportunities that may arise, because almost every job I've had, besides the military one that I started off with out of West Point, obviously, was something that came out of the blue in terms of timing, in terms of the type of position it was. So a lot of it is just to be grounded in basic principles of right and wrong, and just be grounded in those principles and do the best job you can. And I guess one point that I would make for students and anybody else that may move around, and society has changed quite a bit with career tracks, is to learn how to recognize the operating environment that you're in, because every operating environment is different, every culture is different, and your leadership will have to adapt to the different environments that you're in.
So it sounds to me like you've just defined character as one of those traits, and then also a bit of self-awareness, but also an awareness of your surroundings and being able to adapt to those surroundings in the big picture surroundings.
Correct, yes.
Well, I've noticed I noted in my introduction that you've been instrumental in a number of joint commands, dealing with men and women who serve in the uniform, but who also serve in different services that have different cultures, have different traditions and things like that. A lot of different leadership skills when you're working with people in a joint environment. What's the most important skill for a leader, as far as you can tell?
Well, I think that the most important skills for a leader actually transcends the cultures you're going to find yourself part of it. But I'll start off with saying you have to be intelligent, and that gets to being aware of your operating environment and recognizing that it's a different one from the one that you might have succeeded in before. I think integrity is a bedrock principle, and if you violate the basic principles of honesty, I don't think you can ever be a good leader, no matter whether you obtain results or not. And I think you have to have some fortitude. I think you have to be persistent, you have to be strong. You're never always going to win. In fact, you may not win more than half the time, but you have to just drive on to try to get the mission done in the best possible way.
Right.
And let me say one other thing about the military subcultures in the joint world. It's true, the Navy and the Air Force and the Army and Marine Corps are very different, and I'll throw in the Coast Guard there as well. I grew up in the Air Force, and the Navy, as a seafaring career, has different ways of doing business as well. But inside the military, those subcultures are not as different among themselves as the military is from a lot of civil society. Businesses out there, political arenas, and some other professions, the legal profession as well. So,
interesting. And it's interesting you mentioned political, because you've had some experience working on Capitol Hill with the Senate Armed Services Committee. You've also led 2 companies. I'm kind of wondering, General, how do you know when your leadership style is working? Are there any metrics? Are there any indicators maybe that are kind of subtle and maybe not so defined by numbers, but more qualitative?
Well, one that comes to mind is I think you get positive feedback on your leadership when subordinates come to you for advice. And I'm not talking about coming to you advice on how to be successful because they think that you've succeeded, but to come to you advice on how you would approach problems, a little bit tricks of the trade. And to me, that's always important, because if they're unwilling to ask you these sorts of questions, you may be doing well for the organization at a certain point in time, but you don't have a long-term institutional perspectives. And I think what separates good leaders from average leaders are the ones that can step back, look at their institution and their organization over time, and not just at the immediate objectives.
Right. So in other words, be able to have that perspective, and then also be able to share that with the people under your command,
Right.
and the people who depend on you for guidance and that leadership.
Right. You know, one thing, I had a kind of a special mission when I was in Iraq, and it was a very, very tough problem set, but after spending 6 months there looking at this problem set, the hard part really wasn't defining the problem, and it wasn't even coming up with the solution to the problem. It was marketing that solution to an institution that was used to doing business in a different way. So a lot of the big challenges are, you know, the way I look at it, changing culture is the hardest thing to do. It just is. But on the other hand, it pays the best and most enduring long-term dividends. And so you have to kind of recognize which part of that culture you think you can change, and be realistic about it, and try to chip away at it if you can. Or, you know, the wholesale changes are obviously harder, unless you're at the very top of the pyramid. But I think it's important to know what's realistic and not to try to bite off too much, because you're not going to do your subordinates any favors if you say, well, go in there and change the culture, and then they all fail because they try to take off too much. So you want to have them be pragmatic, but still have the right azimuth on what is right for the long-term benefits of the organization.
Well, and that's a good place for me to ask you. We normally ask our guests on this program to talk about learning from failure, because if you're a good leader, you learn from the things that didn't quite work out at the time. Maybe it seemed like a good idea and it just didn't work out. What would you consider an instance where you learned from something that didn't work, from failure?
Well, I did run for office, and I did not win, so I guess by definition that's a failure. And people will come up to me and say, well, you must have really learned a lot of lessons even though you didn't win.
Right.
And my response is, I would have preferred to learn not a damn thing and have won. But one of the things I recognized is, you know, logic and merit does not always win the day. And that doesn't mean you don't drive on. I think an unfortunate lesson I've learned is that logic and merits aren't not even sufficient conditions to win. And so one of the tough questions I would pose myself to students and others is, you know, what is the correlation between being a good leader and winning? If you know that you're going into a situation that your chances of winning are only 5%, but you drive on ahead with that, is it good that you're wasting resources? And I think it's all situation dependent. I know people like Ron Paul who have run perennially and know they're not going to win, but I think he's added a real significant, he's changed the dimensions of the debate, and I think in a positive way, to get people to step back and question it. So I don't think they're necessarily correlated. On the other hand, when you're trying to be a good steward of resources and people's time, that's an assessment you have to make. But I think it's always good to consult with others whose judgment you trust before you take on an endeavor like that. So my main lesson from losing is, you know, just go in fully aware,
Right.
and drive on once you made the decision to go for it.
Great. General, who do you consider a personal hero? Who do you look up to and for help with thinking about how you do what you do?
Well, I've always had a difficult time addressing a question on who I think is a personal hero, because most people would come up with somebody who's been successful, and sometimes that success can be attributed to them being great leaders. Sometimes it could be attributable to luck. I would say, in general, my heroes are not necessarily the most powerful or the highest, but the common person who tries to do the harder right versus the easier wrong, which is a motto that I learned from West Point. And you can see it every day. So my hero is somebody who's not doing something in their personal interest. It may cost them personally, but it's the right thing to do. So I think they've got the right principles. And if they exercise the right judgment, those are the people who are my heroes. And just kind of bring up a controversial but current topic, can somebody who's a criminal be a hero? And it gets down to, integrity and judgment. And, some people see this Mr. Snowden as kind of a hero. And Wall Street Journal brought it up as a legitimate topic. We can point out Nelson Mandela spent decades in jail.
Certainly.
And the founding fathers were considered to be treasonous.
Right.
And so I'll get back to people who became known after they made a very, very difficult judgment to do what they thought was right for all the right reasons. And they initially really failed until they succeeded much bigger.
Wow. Well, General, on that note, we want to thank you for sharing your insights and perspectives on leadership with us today. Thank you again for your service, sir, and we appreciate your support. I'm Max Kakis. You've been watching the AFCEA Leadership Forum 5 Question Series.